ga mij gewoon uitzetten.
Oké.
Ik ga mijn beker uitzetten.
Goedenavond iedereen. Goedenavond. Ben ik goed verstaanbaar tot bovenaan? Kan iemand bovenaan knikken? Dank u. Iedereen van harte welkom op het eerste evenement van Capitant Gent van dit semester. We zijn enorm blij om zoveel gezichten te mogen zien, dus bijna ongezien. En dat wil alleen maar zeggen dat jullie allemaal enorm veel zin hebben en interesse hebben in de toekomst. Future technologies, the future of finance, the future of investing, the future of work, the future of technology, the next big thing. Oké, maar... Oké. Vooraleer we beginnen met de 3 experten aan het woord te laten, wil ik van deze gelegenheid ook gebruik maken om onszelf even voor te stellen aan jullie. Wij zijn Capitant. Maar wat is Capitant? Waarom gaan jullie straks allemaal lid worden als dat nog niet gebeurd is? En als derde, wat hebben wij dit eerste semester nog te bieden aan jullie? Heel simpel, Capitant is een studentenvereniging. Wij zijn studenten die voor studenten en andere geïnteresseerden, voornamelijk in Capitant Gent, lezingen en workshops organiseren. Maar Capitant Gent is niet alleen. Capitant bestaat ook in Antwerpen, Leuven en Brussel. En samen zijn we eigenlijk Capitant Belgium. En Capitant Belgium houdt zich dan voornamelijk bezig met het organiseren van de zogenaamde externe events en de trips naar Londen en Amsterdam. Waarover later meer. Waarom jullie straks allemaal lid worden van Capitant? Wel, ik heb 5 hoofdpunten van het lidmaatschap op deze slide aangekaart. Ten eerste, als lid maak je kans op het behalen van een certificaat. Maak je kans, het is te zeggen, als je 6 interne evenementen bijwoont, waarvan dit er al 1 is, dus hierna nog 5, 1 extern evenement bijwoont, georganiseerd door Capitant Belgium, en een relevante stage hebt opgenomen, dan beschik je over een door ons en onze partners eigenlijk erkend certificaat. Je ontvangt ook je eigen lidkaart, waarmee je kan je aanwezigheid scannen in onze database van ieder evenement. En het belangrijkste eigenlijk, als lid ontvang je exclusieve info over stagemogelijkheden, andere info van onze partnerbedrijven. Die zullen jullie eerst bereiken via een e-mail of dergelijke. En als je vandaag nog lid wordt, ontvangen jullie ook een finance bag. Dat is een zeer leuke goodie bag eigenlijk, met veel stilo's en ja, eigenlijk een Red Bull, dus alles wat je nodig hebt. Maar ook, en zeer belangrijk, onze Investor Guide. Onze Investor Guide is eigenlijk jullie gids als startende belegger. Stel, ik wil nu echt aandelen kopen of in een fonds stappen, maar hoe moet dat? Hoe ga ik online en hoe begin ik daaraan? Investor Guide. En voor €5 maar en 20 seconden het formuliertje invullen dat hier overal ziet liggen, zijt je lid. En al deze voordelen zijn van jullie. Dus ga hier de trappen naar beneden, je loopt erop uit, daar kun je lid worden. Zo, om af te ronden ga ik nog even de kalender overlopen met jullie. Binnen 2 weken is het alweer zover. Onze volgende lezing, 24 oktober, opnieuw in Auditorium Kettelet. Finance meets law. Zal dus voornamelijk gaan, zoals de titel zegt, over de raakvlakken van de advocaten en de finance mensen. Een zeer belangrijk event eigenlijk voor jullie allemaal. Ik wil graag dat jullie de datum 30 oktober echt wel goed bijhouden, want dan organiseren wij onze Finance Career Fair. Dat is een jobfair voor mensen met ambitie in een carrière in finance. Kijk naar deze namen. BNP Paribas, Pelfius, Bingbank, BlackRock zijn nog maar enkele van de aanwezige bedrijven die je daar kan ontmoeten. En ik kan jullie verzekeren, het is enorm belangrijk als je ambitie hebt in finance dat je eerst eens gaat gaan praten met de mensen, al voordat je solliciteert. Dus het is echt wel een must eigenlijk om de mensen te leren kennen tijdens onze careerfair. 30 oktober. Dan op 16 november, een heel gelijkaardig evenement, maar dan echt voor business schools. MyBS betekent My Business School. Dat is opnieuw een beurs met business schools over heel Europa. En wij sluiten intern af in Gent met een skill program. Een aaneenschakeling van 3 workshops rond het thema van corporate finance, weken 8, 9 en 10, waar jullie echt skills aan leren en in groepjes, kleinere groepjes, aan een echte business case gaan werken. Zeer nuttige ervaring voor jullie allemaal, want dat wordt de laatste jaren meer en meer gebruikt ook in de selectieprocedure van jobs. En als laatste evenement, dat is dan een evenement van Capitant Belgium, wil ik jullie graag voorstellen aan de Amsterdam Banking Tour van 14 tot 17 november. Tijdens dit evenement in Amsterdam gaan we echt bedrijven gaan bezoeken. Bij hen op kantoor en daar ook business cases oplossen. Dus voor iedereen die echt zeer veel ambitie heeft in een carrière in Amsterdam of in een bedrijf gevestigd in Amsterdam, allemaal inschrijven. Allee, onder andere ABN AMRO, Rabobank, Kempen & Co. zijn echt prachtige namen. Willen jullie meer info, en dat willen jullie, over deze evenementen? Volg ons dan op Facebook, Capitant Gent. Nu ook ons nieuw Instagram-account, die volop aan het groeien is. Dat is Capitant_Belgium. En onze Snapchat en natuurlijk ook onze website. Zo, dat was genoeg over mijzelf. Ik denk dat het nu tijd wordt om echte experten aan het woord te laten. En wij gaan onze lezing dan ook starten. Als eerste spreker stel ik jullie heel graag voor aan iemand die jullie zal vertellen over artificial intelligence. En die het daarbij voornamelijk zal hebben over de toekomst van hoe wij eigenlijk onze job gaan uitoefenen. Artificial intelligence, gebracht door Toon Vanagt. Alsjeblieft.
And so while we're getting the technology wired up, still not wireless, interesting to see, we're talking about the future here. Who did not understand this introduction in Dutch? No hands going up, dus ik kan gewoon naar het Nederlands verder gaan. I was asked to do this in English, but I'll switch to Dutch. So this is one of the main things we'll be talking about tonight. It's adaptability. So, we gaan in het Nederlands verder gaan. Dus mijn naam is Toon Vanagt en het stukje attention whoring. Je kan op Twitter via @toon met mij connecteren. Ik heb verschillende patches op. Ik ben onder andere de chairman van Open Knowledge Belgium. Dat is een non-profit met heel wat mensen van de Universiteit van Gent trouwens die daarin actief zijn en ex-studenten. Die strijden voor alle dingen open, van open data tot open source, tot open street maps en alles rond open access ook, voor velen onder jullie alsmaar relevanter zal worden, of dat hoop ik althans. Maar ik ben ook een entrepreneur en ik sta hier ook een beetje in die capaciteit. Ik heb een eerste start-up opgericht en als ik jullie leeftijden zie, ik was 26, mateloos ambitieus en ik begon een start-up. Dat was Casius en ik haalde daar 4 miljoen euro mee op. Ik heb daar ook heel veel geleerd, we hebben dat opgebrand. Dat is een andere talk. Maar er is wel een goede tip naar timing toe. En this is a good time to be an entrepreneur. Er is weer heel veel geld op zoek naar interessante ideeën, dus dat is een boom-bust beweging. Dus ik kan jullie alleen maar aanraden om die entrepreneurial journey ook te volgen. Momenteel ben ik bezig met data.be en lex.be. Dat zijn 2 start-ups waar veel AI aan te pas komt. De eerste doet bedrijfsgegevens. We nemen open data van het Belgisch Staatsblad, van de KBO, Kruisenbank Ondernemingen en de Balanscentrale Nationale Bank. We meshen dat samen, we doen wat entity extraction en dat laat ons toe om allemaal nieuwe insights te verwerken, zoals dat dan goed heet. De andere is lex.be, dat is misschien ook iets voor jullie volgende talk, waar het over finance gaat en legal tech. Lex.be is voor juristen, dus ga zeker eens een kijkje nemen als je toevallig in die afdelingen studeert. Een tool om eigenlijk de Belgische wetteksten makkelijk doorzoekbaar te maken en om ervoor te zorgen dat je rechtspraak kan vinden. Helaas is de Belgische rechtspraak maar voor een heel klein deeltje ontsloten, dus we vechten ervoor om die volledig te openen. Maar wel geanonimiseerd uiteraard. Dit was een beetje het overzicht wat ik net gegeven heb. Ik ben actief daarnaast in 2 VZW's, Fintech Belgium en wat ik net al noemde Open Knowledge. En we zijn met legal tech, met een community bezig. En dat is typisch iets wat je als start-up in een nieuwe industrie binnenkomen doet. Je gaat eigenlijk met de nieuwkomers bijeenzetten en je creëert een community om te proberen om in die markt de incumbents samen een beetje niet aan te pakken, want ze zijn momenteel heel geïnteresseerd in wat de start-ups doen. Maar we zitten nog in die cozy fase van de grote incumbents kijken naar die sexy start-ups van moeten wij dat nu ook gaan doen of kopen we ze gewoon op? Of is dat sowieso een slecht idee waar geen business model achter zit? Dus voilà. Sorry? Very good. So this is a minority request and we're going to honor that one. So I don't mind at all. So thank you very much. We can all feel very international now. We've just gone to Silicon Valley and you're going to see this speech about automation and artificial intelligence. And all the buzzwords will sound right now, doesn't it? And I can feel much more professional talking English, don't I? It's been around for a while, these buzzwords, and that's one of the main messages I want to give you all. In society, when something gives you fear, we have stories, and that's what I would say the Gretchen, all the old stories going from religion to health. If something inspires fear, we make a story, so we can already start thinking about the fear that it gives us, and we can overcome that. That's also why we dream, by the way. And so, if you look at the stories, they became movies. And if you go back to 27, Metropolis, great classic. More recently, Blade Runner, who saw the new one? Wow, so you don't only attend huge events in the evening, but you mix that with some good movies too, so great one too. But again, these, if you look at the Blade Runner, that was 82, everything in there is here today. All the technology things that seem far off in science fiction, 2017, it's almost all there. And it's not a commodity yet, but we can see it's within grasp, within reach. Same thing happening in science. Sometimes you have to fake it to make it. The Turk was an automated chess player, but had a human inside. But that's something startups do. They call it concierge service. Nothing works, but you have people behind the screen doing the manual work. You say, we have a great startup that does this fantastic service. But it goes on, Fordism with the automation of the auto industry, gaming theories. If you look at those Boston Dynamics robots, you see them flying through, they jump on the stage, they go off, so it's there. But innovation is going faster, and the delivery of that innovation is going faster, and that's what's inhibiting a lot of that fear and what the fear mongering. So the robots are here to disrupt you. Who's heard that message? So quite a few people. So, and you're still studying, and yet you're going to study in a field that's I would say that the job that's linked to that field is probably going to look very different from what the people that study that field will be doing, and what those that graduated 30, 40 years ago are still doing today. If you look at the legal field, if you look at doctors, everything, it's hugely impacted by rapidly improving technology solutions. And so this one is for the fintech community, the bankers. There's a lot of FUD now. FUD stands for fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Beware. This is a great strategy. Fear, uncertainty, and doubt. If you want to sell something, you use fear, uncertainty, and doubt. It's used in politics, like, oh, we have issues, oh, we have immigrants, oh, fear, they're going to take your jobs, we have to build walls and keep them out. Sells. Great political message, very easy. Fear-mongering speaks to your stomach, not to your brain, but if you want to buy it, well, I feel sorry for you. That's another discussion. But whenever you see somebody trying to like plant those fear seeds in your brain, you have to think, what are they trying to sell me? And so this whole thing of like, oh, you're studying something is going to be irrelevant. Well, I have good news. I'm on the more balanced view. Yes, but it's been around forever, and you probably shouldn't be that afraid about. Same thing about terrorism. Ooh, terrorism! Look at how many articles you've been bombarded with. When you bike out tonight, it's a higher likelihood, and I don't wish for any of you to happen, that you get hit on your bike than you will be hit by a terrorist. I mean, that's just the data out there. And yet the fear of getting on your bike is much less than thinking like, oh, I go to Brussels and it must be dangerous. I go to the airport, there's been an attack. Yeah? So that's fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And my punchline is a punch card. Who knows what a punch card is? Oh, wow, some people studied history in there. Yeah? So this was the storage device of computers 60s, 70s. They would store the binary code as a little hole in a card that would be punched in the card and would be refed. And so people in the 60s and 70s could not imagine that each of your phones hold like dozens, carloads, truckloads of this paper in memory. And even the ones still having a Nokia have that type of memory out there. Yeah? So it's amazing how quick that technology evolved, and we couldn't foresee that. And so it has been around, things evolve, it goes quicker, you get more and more memory and storage now, but it's nothing new. Yeah? This one always makes me laugh. And I'm not talking about data, the Android of, if there's any Trekkies in the room, I hear you. But what makes me laugh is that those CAPTCHAs. Who has ever had to break one of these codes? Yeah, all the hands go up. I won't tell which websites you went to, but you have to say basically, I'm not a robot. So how crazy is that? We have an algorithm creating a hardly readable thing, and we want you to break it to show that you're human. So I always find it extremely funny, and I think it's a very broken system. But this is a state of artificial intelligence in this field. You go to a website which is running on fully automated web platforms, and they do not want bots and scrapers on there. They want humans on there, and they ask you this question. They want you to break it. So full circle around, it's an outdated thing, and we still use it. We ask humans to break this code to prove they're humans. So. This is a McKinsey report about the jobs being automated. Only half of them with current technology. Which half of them? Well, they're good news for most of you, because if you made it to these chairs, you jumped a few hoops, you went into higher education, and so it's unlikely you'll be in the producing part of the food, paper, and textile industry. But those jobs on the right, and that's the hourly wage scale that go up to the €100 per hour, with the current technology, McKinsey doesn't think that there will be that heavily disrupted. Yeah? Current technology. Of course, as I said before, the cycles go faster and faster, and so this prediction might be outpaced, but I think there's quite some merit in there of saying, like, okay, this has been happening for a long time. They took our jobs. This is what is happening in an Amazon warehouse. Before you had stock pickers. They had to go around, L5, take your little toy that you ordered online, put it in a basket. Now, the racks come to them, and it's much better for the working conditions. You just have to pick it out. And this is creating quite a few with jobs. Yeah? They have 30-fold robots, but they also have 3 times more people in there. So you can say, wow, that's fantastic, but keep in mind that they're destroying a lot of jobs in classic retail. Yeah? They're not in this graph. This is their good luck graph, and making them look good. Yeah, we also hire a lot of people, but most of the people are not in the engineering department. They're in the very hand jobs of still doing the laborious work of getting it out of that tray and putting it into something else or doing the packaging. And so it's probably a matter of time, and I don't think many of you would want to be in those stock picking and in those item picking jobs either. So I think it's something where your generation is entering into a labor market which has a lot more flexibility, which sounds nice from an economic point of view, but that also takes a lot of certainty out of your, I would say, base of life, your savings, and knowing where you stand in life and being able to take some time off. And so if we end up with an economy full of these flex jobs, low-paid flex jobs, we really have an issue, I think, on the psychological and societal level. So it's a thing of all times. We all used to work in agriculture, apart a few kings and landowners, but like majority of people was just busy with getting food on the table. Yeah? Today, only less than 2% of us work in the agriculture industry, and we became a service economy. Yeah? Very interesting evolution, has been going on for a long time, and a lot of jobs have been automated in that period. Yeah? Again, what does history tell us? A lot of workers will be replaced, but it will also create a lot of new jobs. For example, social media managers. They weren't around when I graduated. There were no social media around. Yeah, maybe not counting MySpace, but they're gone. Mobile application developers. There were no decent mobile phones around, so the profession didn't exist. SEO experts, consultants. Yeah, trying to game the scraping bot from Google to get on the first results, new professions. And so nobody could have predicted when I was studying, like, I think it's very good if you would become an SEO specialist, good markets, good profession to end up in. No. But if you were studying marketing and languages and you know a little bit about semantics, you could make a nice living in there. And there's new jobs. For example, this is taken from a company that used to have a workforce with ladders that would go and inspect roof infiltrations. Yeah? And now the same people who were working in dangerous conditions, getting on those roofs and taking pictures and sending out the right repair team, they can now just send up a drone, look at it, and send in the repair team. Now, you might say, yeah, but in time that will be fully automated. But in the meantime, before that full automation arrives, we are creating safer jobs for those experts in there. And this is happening for surgeons during remote surgery, a Tesla factory. I mean, those cars still have a lot of human hands putting them together. I like the example on the right corner. This is like a data set of lung cancers being opened. And algorithms are extremely good at pattern recognition. Yeah. And so by opening those historical medical images, we can detect much more easily which way cancers developed, which were the dangerous ones, and then you can make all sorts of correlations and go back in time and see which treatment would serve. Or we can help radiologists in having like a pre-classifier, saying like, you really need to look at this one. You thought there was nothing, but we detected, the algorithm detected there was a red light there. I'm not saying we should replace them, I'm saying they get an enhanced job there. Yeah. So how will you survive? Well, I think you will thrive in several ways. First of all, lifelong learning. That's the bad news. Huh? You thought you were going to sit in here for a few years, get your degree, and then close those books and keep doing the same thing forever after. Well, I'm afraid that's not going to be the case. I keep learning every day to keep up with what's happening in the field that I'm active in as a professional. And if you like what you do, it doesn't even feel like work. You know, it's a passionate thing to do. Technical skills still need to evolve, but if you have a good base, if you try to understand the basic technical skills, if you pay attention to your statistics course, if you do a bit of math, you'll be able to grasp a lot of the concepts that will come over later. And then be creative. I mean, the whole AI part, and I know there's neural network out there that can copy and mimic artwork we like, but it's gonna remain a human skill that we will pay for. And this evening is amazing to me because it's probably streamed online. I see a lot of cameras pointed at me. But you all did decide to come here in person, and we're talking automation and everything. So there is reasons why we like physical contact. I can look you in the eye, you can feel approached, and those things still have value. And so that will continue to be the case. And a last one that I care about a lot is ethics. I think we humans, and we're talking about artificial intelligence, are gonna be needed to approve and authorize what algorithms do, because they're extremely biased. It's early days, but we already see the bias that is built into algorithms because we feed them, in many parts, it's text semantics. And just for one thing, language is a sexist thing because it was written historically by men. And so it is not a neutral thing. So we're feeding a neural network with something that is not neutral. So you need humans to compensate for that. Yeah? So think about that one. Or there's a classic one, a moral dilemma. You are buying the latest new car. It doesn't have to have this logo on front. There's many others that will offer this. And you now have a self-driving car with options. Something breaks down. What do you want the car to do? There's bushes, soft bushes, but they will injure you a bit. But everybody gets out fine, but behind there. There's two children waiting in front of a wall. They will break a little bit what's going to happen, and you will kill the children. Or you have an old couple standing on the other side. And so, what do you want the car to do? Can you have a paid option from the car manufacturing that allows you to pay extra to optimize your survival rate? Do we find this ethical? Yeah. And these are things, no, of course, that's not ethical. We don't want that. Well, there's code. Code is written by humans. And so, these cars are getting input. It's just a big riding sensor. And it's being programmed with rules. And those rules are being put in there by humans. And so, it's going to have to decide in nanoseconds, what do I do? But so, as soon as you do that, I mean, if even at the basic level today, you know about the Volkswagen scandal, if they already try to scam the exhaust part, just imagine the huge economic benefits. If the word is either, if you buy that car with that option, your survival rate goes up. And if you are a very rich person, you might say like, well, Who cares? I want to survive a car crash. But if you're a social person, you know, if I have the privilege to drive with a car and be in the public space and be a hazard for others, I think I should be the one dying and not the people standing on the pavement. So I'm going to crash into the wall and die myself. Those are tough ethical discussions. And we have a very, this is an easy example, but this is happening all over when you talk AI. I mean, we're active in lex.be. If we do not have all the case law and only have a small part of it, then you're training with a limited view, and it's called an echo chamber. You're just going to repeat. In the US, it's happening already. You have software determining what is the chance of recidivism. So I don't know, the English-speaking person in the room, does that word mean something to you? No? So that's the probability of you doing the same crime twice and 3 times and so on. Yeah. So that's you learn the word of Dutch now. Yeah. So getting out of your bad habits. And when they look at that, they're just going to feed social profiles to it. And they found out that people of Afro-American origin, often coming from deprivileged backgrounds, they have a higher likelihood to commit crimes again, which is perfectly logical if you look at it from a sociological point of view. But if the algorithm says that and you happen to have that background, you won't get off your sentence easily, you won't get out on parole, and you'll be sent to jail. And so that's bias built into an algorithm. That's happening today. That's a law system being used by some American courts. So moral dilemmas. It's high time that all of you start to develop your ethical skills and how you would like society to deal with that. So there's a saying, data is the new oil. Some people say, no, that's not true at all. Data is a new currency. You're paying with your data. But so this is, I would say, my pitch of the 2 startups that I currently try to develop. As said earlier, data for the business info, Lex for the legal part. And you are the future. I mean, I'm truly positive when I look at this room that you come up in such great numbers to talk about these subjects. And I'm also very happy that I rushed through my slides, that I can allow for some time for Q&A, right? So let's make this interactive. Ladies and gentlemen, fire your questions in Dutch or English, whatever you want. Yeah, go ahead. Okay, basic income, big question, because if everything goes to AI and automation, what are we going to do with all the time that we are supposedly have to work today? So this is a big debate with 3 answers. So the first, there's one, and there's a big school of people, especially if you look at Singularity in Silicon Valley, it says, yeah, we're just going to introduce basic income, but it still has to be paid somewhere from a public force. And those same people working in Silicon Valley are the same one that optimize their taxes through Ireland and other places. So the part where they contribute to, I would say, the state side subsidizing capacity is very low. So I always have a difficulty from those same people saying, yeah, basic income for everybody and all that problem is solved. It's a little bit an easy excuse to say it's going to solve itself. Yeah? The other group says, yeah, there's no way, if you look at the current economic system, to fund that. And secondly, if you want to do it, the level of the basic income is so low that it's below the poverty line. And so it's not really and if you want to fix the fact that some people have too little, you should probably use the money there to help that little group, the smaller group of people there, to make them thrive and not give it to everybody. So those are the 2 schools. Honestly, I don't know which way it's going to fall, because there's a lot of uncertainty there, but the future will show. But we need to have the data, and there's experiments happening in smaller communities, certain towns, smaller regions, that will show us, is it feasible or not? I think the system is not compatible with the way we run the capitalist system today. Yeah, so we could have a very long, you could have a whole evening just about basic income. Another question. Yeah, go ahead. Okay, so the question is, how did I become an entrepreneur? So first of all, I think it's something when you're an entrepreneur, you probably know and felt it for a long time. You're doing stuff, you're using your time, you're experimenting, and you see opportunities. So that's what I've always felt. As I was a student, I was building websites. You see new stuff, you touch it, you find a customer, somebody who pays up, that validates, I did something of value, I got money for it. So that's the first validation that you probably have some entrepreneurial genes and the will to get there. Secondly, I would recommend all of you not to just become an entrepreneur, but take the learning curve of one of those big names you had on there, those nice companies, as you refer to them. They're great schools. You get paid to learn. You make your first mistakes there. You learn the business bullshit words. You sit in meetings and you hear people talking about the business lingo, and you get self-confidence like, hey, I can do that. You get your first working experience, build some without paying those first errors and that long trail yourself. So that's the trail I took. I worked as a consultant at Accenture for 2 years. But while I was there, so the first time I went to Silicon Valley in '98 and I pitched an idea and I was laughed at. It was me, myself, alone. My demo didn't work, and they didn't believe in the idea, which was a virtualization, a very technical, abstract concept. So I was laughed away. So I came back to Belgium, and my colleagues were like, that's the guy. He thought he was going to do a startup in Silicon Valley. But I had 2 colleagues who were doing a startup, and I'd been renovating my own house back then. And I did a marketplace for contractors because I saw how hard it was to find good contractors. And so solving a problem you see and that you can relate with, and you're seeing a solution for that, I'd say that's the basic of an entrepreneur. When you see a problem that you think you can solve and where there's a viable business model behind it. And nowadays, I would not raise. So for neither for Data nor for Lex, we didn't raise VC money. We're doing it the lean startup way. So you try to generate revenues, find a paying customer for the features you're developing, which deliver, and then you scale from there. And only once you found a repeatable business model, you will go and look for capital to scale it up. But it's painful and long, I can tell you. I mean, Data is 4 years that we're trying to reach that point. So it's a I would say it's a long journey. It's a marathon, not a sprint. So prepare for that, and prepare for a lot of no's and a lot of downhill parts. It's not as glorious. You only hear about the glorious stories. There's a lot of failures in there, and in our culture, the failures are not embraced. I mean, it's a learning opportunity. So don't be afraid. Even if it doesn't succeed, you'll have learned something for life. And when you are 80 years old, you don't have to look back, if only I would have done that company and would not have been stuck in my job for 50 years. Or my basic income and never getting out of that, yeah, whatever you prefer. Time for one more question? One last question? Yeah, go ahead. Well, I don't know. You were first. Ja. Sommige bedrijven planten chips in bij werknemers. Ja. Dat klinkt natuurlijk als iets... vandaag klinkt als iets heel scary. En dat is het waarschijnlijk ook. Maar ik zie heel veel, of een aantal brillen in de zaal. Ja? Dat is ook een vorm van technologie die u enhanced. Ja? En dus als die chip alleen maar dient om uw badge te vervangen, dan zie ik daar weinig nut van in. Want dat kan op veel betere manieren. Hè. Gezien technologie kan u met uiterlijke kenmerken daar even goed voor identificeren. Dus daar zie ik het nut niet echt van in. Als dat is, en dat is een van de volgende sprekers, om uw blockchain wallet te beveiligen met een fysieke sleutel, dan kan ik daar al meer nut van inzien. Ja? Dus er zijn altijd, bij al die dingen heb je een voor en een tegen. En heb je de sociale barrière om te zeggen, nee, we gaan toch niet technologie in mijn vingers schieten en daar loop ik rond met zo'n splinter zoveel jaren lang. Ja? Dus dat is een makkelijke. Hè? Maar er is vandaag al technologie ouder. De pacemakers zijn internet connected, kunnen gehackt worden. Hoe gaan we daarmee om? Ja? En er komen meer en meer, ik zou zeggen, enhancement features aan die technologie uw lichaam bieden om capaciteiten te hebben die je vandaag niet hebt. Dus the future will tell, but you will live through it. So it's passionate times. Hè? Jullie leven echt in een tijd dat je dat zelf gaat kunnen beslissen ook, want dat zal met consent zijn. Hè? Want er is ook gelukkig sterke regelgeving om ervoor te zorgen dat je dat niet gaan kunnen opleggen. Ja? We krijgen wel risico, een tweedeling. Dat je gaat zeggen van de mensen die meegaan in dat technologisch verhaal gaan bepaalde voordelen hebben en degenen die analoog willen blijven, die gaan veel meer moeite moeten doen om ergens binnen te raken, om iets te bekomen, om een procedure te volgen. Of daar meer van moeten betalen. Dat is het risico. En dat is weer een ander ethisch debat. Van willen we dat die extra kost daar gelegd wordt of juist bij degenen uit de collectiviteit die voor het digitale gaan. Ik zou nog heel graag met jullie lang verder doorgaan, maar ik zit op een tight schedule, is mij gezegd. Of 4 minuten? Wow, nog een vraag. Come on, let's have it. Dit is, ja. Not my field of expertise. Dus dat is eigenlijk voorgaande op het vorige, de complete merger van mens en machine en dus far-fetched. Dus als ondernemer probeer ik naar dingen te kijken die ik denk dat ik kan oplossen. En singularity iedere keer als ik in Silicon Valley kom en veel ondernemersvrienden zijn daar volle fan van, Singularity University, maar ik heb altijd zo'n beetje de gezonde reflex, zal ik maar zeggen, om te zeggen van ja, we zullen wel zien. Voorlopig is het er nog niet en ik los liever problemen op die ik vandaag kan oplossen dan nu te gaan werken op de full merger van mens en machine en het eeuwige leven door onze brain te dumpen in een computersysteem. Allee, nog een laatste, nog 2 minuten. Ja. Haha. Dus, is België een goede omgeving om je start-up op te richten? Ja. 1 woord. Meerwaardebelasting. We don't have it. Ja, als ondernemer, dat is het enige. Wij zijn, je hoort overal klagen over de belastingen zijn hoog en dit en dat. Vertel het niet te luid verder, maar in België is geen meerwaardebelasting. Dus als je een start-up doet en bij wijze van spreken 5 jaar werkt aan een overlevingsloon en je verkoopt goed je start-up, dan ga je niet de loonlasten gehad hebben die je zou gehad hebben, moest je betaald hebben, en ga je wel die meerwaarde hebben. De vraag is natuurlijk, vinden we dat nog eerlijk? En zijn de lasten dan gelijk verdeeld voor het risico dat je genomen hebt? Maar er is zeker voor te pleiten dat België eigenlijk een heel interessant land is voor oprichters van start-ups, omdat we geen meerwaardebelasting hebben. Dus als je waarde creëert, ga je daar niet op belast worden. Ja? Langs dat tweede voordeel dat we hier hebben, vind ik zelf, er is een enorme pool van talent. Zowel technisch, marketingwijs, we liggen centraal in Europa, we zijn meertalig, je kan hier veel markten testen, dus ik vind dat wij hier goed geplaatst zijn. Ja? Maar dat neemt niet weg als ik in Silicon Valley ben, je hebt daar een ecosysteem wat verder en langer ontwikkeld is en we proberen dat heel erg om dat in België ook mee te ontwikkelen. Dus een initiatief in Brussel, boven Centraal Station, Be Central, dat probeert om die digitale conversie aan iedereen aan te bieden, om die trein niet te missen als land eigenlijk. Dus zijn taalbarrières een rem op de groei? Het voorbeeld van China wordt gegeven. Dus eerst of all, je hebt gezien, we zijn van het Engels naar het Nederlands. We went from Dutch to English and back. So if you speak a few languages, you won't have that barrier. Yeah? So another good reason to study language. Secondly, you might have seen Google came out with a little earbud that does 40 languages real time. Yeah? So again, this is not technology that's being implanted in your brain. It's an earplug on top. It feels less intrusive than going into your nerves, right? But connecting to your nervous system. But so this is around. So if you're studying languages, please continue to study languages. Because I think it's a good basis to train your brain in that adaptability and being able to understand concepts in different languages. So don't quit your language courses, yeah, because the technology is there. That was not my message. But it's relatively easy to overcome with technology. And markets are not that different. You gave the example of China. Okay, this is my last question to the group. Who's bought on AliExpress in this room? Wow! So here's the answer to your question. All the Chinese junk, it comes to the Dutch-speaking market. Did you have anybody had to speak Chinese for this? No, you didn't. They understood how to tap into your needs, and they sold you a cheap product, and you were happy with it. Yeah. Okay, so we'll keep it at that one. Thank you very much for your attention. It was my pleasure, and feel free to connect.
Dankjewel. Ja, prima. Ja. Aan de pointer. Oké. Ja, oké iedereen. Wij gaan naadloos verder met onze lecture. Dus onze volgende spreker is een Bitcoin en blockchain specialist. En die zal voor jullie vertellen over Bitcoin en blockchain uiteraard. Ik hoef geen verdere introductie meer te geven. Ik denk dat meneer Jean-Luc Verhelst dat zelf wel kan doen. Dus dames en heren, mag ik graag jullie aandacht voor Jean-Luc Verhelst. De mic is zo, ja.
Is het goed? Can you hear me? Yeah, good, this is working. So we're going to take a little bit of time to set things up, and I'm all yours in a minute. You okay?
Nope. We're good.
Okay.
Probeer.
All right. Hello, everyone. Good evening. Whoa. So many people. It's impressive. Sometimes when there are many people, they're in the dark, but this is full light. I love it. So, I'm Jean-Luc Verhelst. Also have a couple of different positions. Working for Deloitte as a strategy consultant and nowadays more blockchain consultant. I'm also the author of a book, Bitcoin, the Blockchain and Beyond. Tell a bit more about that during the lecture. And I'm also the founder of a think tank around blockchain in Belgium. And we're now going to merge together with another community to really create a large community in Belgium. And we're also looking into Ghent. We have someone in Ghent who's trying to set these things up. So if you're interested in joining the community, blockchain, Bitcoin community, cryptocurrencies, don't hesitate to reach out. I'll put you in contact with the right people in Ghent. Good. This being said, the future of technology, that's the title of the talk. And I think one of the big revolutions we had lately is the internet. Internet changed a lot of things. And what this internet is all about is about how information was centralized and went to a decentralized way. Let me give you an example. Before there was the internet, you could come home, sit in your chair and watch the news or read a newspaper. To get informed, and the news was selected for you. There was a central party that was selecting the news for you, and then you were looking into the news and what was happening. But you would have not imagined that maybe one day you will be able to write an article yourself, to comment on something, to publish something. You would say that's something a journalist does, not me. But then the internet came along, and from one day to the other, it was possible for anyone to spread any type of information to anyone else. And that's what internet made possible, the decentralization of information, giving the power to everyone to spread information. And it changed a lot of things. I'm not going to go into detail to all of them, but Wikipedia is probably the most peer-reviewed encyclopedia that is out there. There is not one professor that is giving his advice to be in the encyclopedia. No, this is reviewed continuously. And if there's a discussion, it's open source. People can have the discussion on Wikipedia itself. DVD rental stores completely out of business today. Who's still renting a DVD? No one, I think. We're all streaming Netflix, HD, not HD, but we're all using internet to have our movies. But there's one industry which was not disrupted or which didn't change, and that's the financial industry. Now, why is that? That is because in all of these 4 previous cases, what you have about the information is that you're actually creating a copy of the information. You're not really transferring them. Let me explain. When you send an attachment over by email, you're not really transferring the attachment. You're creating a copy of it, and the person who's going to download the attachment is also creating a copy. So on the internet, for a long time, we tried to find a way to move money around as well, but that didn't happen. Wouldn't it be amazing if I sent €1 to you by email, but I still have a copy of the euro myself? I mean, it would just be too good to be true. Creating money out of nothing, just like that. But the problem is money needs to be scarce to be valuable. So that's why the financial industry remained quite active, even if the internet appeared. So what do we do on the internet to still transact? Because we didn't manage to transfer value from one person to another, we use intermediaries. Sorry. Let's take a simple example. Let's say you want to buy a book on Amazon and you're paying with PayPal. So you're going to pay with PayPal. They're going to charge your Visa card. They're going to charge your bank account. And then the money is going to transfer by still a couple of intermediaries before it arrives at the publisher. And then finally at the person who receives the money, the author of the book. And in this case, there may be 5 or 6 intermediaries involved. But if you have an American bond, for example, that needs to be transferred from one company to another, or from one individual to another, we have up to 11 intermediaries involved. And all of these intermediaries are necessary to keep track of who owns what, and to keep kind of this accounting ledger of who owns what and who owns which piece, which chair, etc. But if today, in the world today, I have 10 euros and I want to buy the tie of this gentleman, and I give you 10 euros, you give me the tie. We made a transaction, just like that. And yeah, you can keep it. I'll keep the tie as well, by the way. Thank you very much. I hope it's, well, I think it's okay. So, but what happened here is we just made a transaction from one person to another without any intermediary involved and no fee taken. In the system on the internet with all these intermediaries, they all take a part of the pie, they all take a little transaction fee. Wouldn't it be amazing if we could do the exact same thing on the internet as what we just did right now? Well, that's what Bitcoin makes possible. Bitcoin makes it possible to have peer-to-peer transaction from one person to another without having any intermediaries involved. Now, what does this mean? This means that Bitcoin is to internet what Bitcoin is to money, what internet is to information. In other words, if today you no longer need a newspaper to have information, tomorrow you will no longer need a bank to make your payments. And actually I say tomorrow, but that's already the case today because this is working since a couple of years and it's used also for big transactions internationally in particular. So that's what Bitcoin makes possible, payments without banks, having transfer of value from one person to the other. Okay, but what about blockchain? Bitcoin, blockchain, how do they relate from one to another? Well, I like to think about it this way. Blockchain is the technology that is behind Bitcoin. So think about it like this. Blockchain is the iPhone, and Bitcoin is just one application that sits on the iPhone. But there are many other applications in many other fields. And this is just an example of the number of applications that are existing. Ticketing, automated tax, supply chain management. The number of applications for blockchain is huge. So this is a technology that is really that has a huge potential to rechange a lot of things, just the way internet changed a lot of things. All good, but what is blockchain? So to explain you blockchain, we're going to go back to kindergarten, and I brought with me a couple of blocks to explain you very concretely how the blockchain works. So this is a block from the blockchain. It's called block number 1, and in this block you can store information, whether that's data, a message, a transaction, a contract, whatever it is. It's block number 1, and it's going to sit on the network. A couple of minutes later, there's a second block that comes along and says, hey, I'm block number 2, and I'm going to link myself to block number 1. Note, this is a rule on the blockchain. The blockchain is governed by rules, and every time a new block comes along, he needs to make a reference to the previous blocks. That's one of the fundamental rules of a blockchain. So block number 3 comes along, he needs to respect the rules. So what does he say? Say, hey, I'm block number 3, and I'm going to link myself to block number 2. So he's going to sit on here. So what do we have here? We have a sequential order of blocks. Block number 1, block number 2, and block number 3. And they all make a reference to the previous blocks. So we have a chain of blocks. How would you call that? A blockchain, thank you, exactly. So we have a blockchain here, and since we know that there is some information in this blockchain, we can say it's kind of similar to a database, but it is not. And why is that? Well, because you don't really have one blockchain database, you usually have one copy of the database. In the blockchain world, you have multiple copies. This is a node of the blockchain, and a node of the blockchain is just someone who owns a duplicate of the blockchain. I personally have a Bitcoin node on my computer, so everybody can have one. And this is another node of the blockchain. So instead of having one central database, we have a distributed database, a distributed blockchain that sits amongst many different computers. Still not super exciting, I would think. But then there is some magic trick. You can store information in there. So let's say, for example, that you write a book, and you want to be sure that people know that you are the author of the book. So I'm writing a book, but before publishing it, I want to have a review from my friend Bob. And I asked Bob, here's a copy of the book. Can you have a look at it? Give me your comments. Tell me what you think. Now, I thought Bob was a friend, but maybe he's not such a good friend. Because Bob reads the book and he thinks, oh, it's a pretty good book. Maybe a Nobel Prize one day, who knows? What if I could steal it? And Bob just copy-pastes the books, changes the name, goes to a publisher and publishes it while he's still telling me that he's still reading it. So in this case, Bob will be able to steal my book. But because I was not too stupid, I created a copy, or I encrypted my book, and I've put it in block number 2. So I've put my book in block number 2, and everybody has then a copy of something that is encrypted and that represents my book. And they know that this belongs to me. So if Bob wants to steal my book now, what does he have to do? He has to remove block number 2 that contains the proof that I created the book. So if he does so on his blockchain, well, he can certainly do so, but everybody will see it immediately. They will see immediately that Bob's blockchain is corrupt. So if Bob wants to remain part of the network, he will have to accept that I wrote a book. By the way, you also notice that this is block number 3, and it's now making a reference to block number 1. So not only is this blockchain different from all the others, it is invalid because it's not respecting one of the rules, so everybody will reject it. So Bob has no many choices. He just has to accept the truth and that he didn't write this book. So what do we have? If we recap the blockchain, we have a chain of blocks that is distributed, and you can never take any piece of information away. Everything you put in the blockchain stays in the blockchain. If we look at what this means compared to traditional databases, in traditional databases you have a centralized system, meaning there is one central party that keeps track of who owns what. For example, there's also one single source of truth. So let's take the example of the government of Honduras. The administration in Honduras is keeping track of who owns which piece of land. But people working at the administration, they cheated a bit, and they were allocating some pieces of land to some of their friends. So in this case, it was very difficult for the actual owner of the piece of land to prove that he owns the piece of land, because the central database that everybody is supposed to trust said something differently. In a blockchain system, this is not possible, because everybody agrees and keeps track of who owns what. So if you want to change something somewhere, you have to change it everywhere, and other people will not agree with that unless it has been signed by the owner of the land and say that he's willing to transfer it. So you remove the central trusted party, you remove the single point of failure. If this blockchain moves away or is lost, you still have plenty of copies that are sitting all over the world on the network. So you cannot remove a blockchain like that. So that's why blockchains are, in some instances, more efficient and better solutions than databases. I'm not saying databases are not useful. They've been working for 40 years. They're very efficient, and they do an amazing job. But there might not be the things we want for every type of transaction or everything in our lives. Just a quick highlight, there are 3 types of blockchains. There are the public blockchains, which is basically Bitcoin, Ethereum, the big networks that everybody is free to join, everybody can be part of the network, you can all join this network. Then there are the permission blockchains, and that's something we see a lot of companies doing today, which basically is a little group of individuals, of companies that decide to have their own blockchain and use that amongst them to get rid of their intermediaries, but that is not open to the external world. And then finally, there are the purely private blockchains, but maybe I should rename that to single entity blockchain, because private is also sometimes used for permission. So single entity blockchains are blockchains that are managed by one single entity, just one company, and that makes absolutely no sense. Because if there's only one blockchain, well, nobody will see when I cheat or when I recreate the history of blockchain. So never use a blockchain if it's only used by one central party. Use a database, they're much more efficient. Good. What can we do with it? So we're going to go through 3 things. The first one is record keeping. Then we're going to speak about transfer of value and cryptocurrencies. And finally, we'll have a look at smart contracts. And then we'll see some other futuristic stuff. But let's start with record keeping. I already explained the example of my book, so I won't do that again. I keep a record of my book on the blockchain. Let's say I'm interviewed by the TED. And the TED is writing an article, and they quote me in one of their articles. The article is stored in block number 2. It's stored in one of our blocks on the blockchain. And then later on, as soon as the article is published, I can read it, and I can send a message on the blockchain saying, yes, I've been quoted correctly, or no, I've been misquoted on this article. And I can do that immediately, so that other people who are reading the article could see, okay, there's a quote that Jean-Luc said. Has it been well reported, or is it disagreeing with the way the journalist is writing it down? So in this way, you kind of give more transparency on the information that is out there. And in the future, I cannot, if I say, yes, this has been quoted correctly, in 10 years I won't be able to blame the journalist, because I actually have a record in the blockchain certifying that that was my opinion at that point of time. So blockchain is all about keeping track of who says what in a way that you cannot remove information. Second part, cryptocurrencies, and we're going to go a bit more into detail on cryptocurrencies in general and what this means really for people and why it's different from current money. But I first want you to understand how cryptocurrencies work. So let's go back a bit in time here with our blocks. We will be back at number 1. Yep. And I'm going to write a check. I'm going to write a check to send some bitcoins over from me to Jens. So Jens, I'm going to send you 3 bitcoins. I don't know what the price is, by the way, today, but it's probably quite some value. So I'm going to write a check saying from Jean-Luc to Jens for an amount of 3 bitcoins. And I'm going to put that into block number 1. Then a couple of minutes later, you want to spend one of your 3 bitcoins. And you're going to write again a check. You're going to write a check, what is your name? Matthias. You're going to write a check from Jens to Matthias for an amount of 1 bitcoin. And that's going to go into a block. Now, before the block is validated and before people accept this block, they're going to ask themselves, okay, is this a valid block? Does it respect all of the rules? So first, we are expecting a block that is called block number 3. Does it make a reference to the previous block? Yes, this is block number 3. It refers to the previous block. Let's do some other checks that needs to be respected. Jens, does he even have 1 bitcoin? Can he just spend a bitcoin like that? Well, they will look at the previous blocks and they will see that in block number 1, he received 3 bitcoins from me. And he didn't spend them in the meantime, so he can certainly send 1 bitcoin over to Matthias. So this is a valid transaction. It will be accepted. And there are many, in this case there's just 1 check, but there are many transactions in block number 3. So everybody does the same checks on his computer. Everybody is checking that all the rules are respected, and there's a software doing that, of course. You're not doing that manually, and accepts this block and creates the next block. And we move along this way to check who owns how much when. Now, in this case, what is important to realize is that as you make the payment, there is a record on the blockchain. So if you think about what this means for accountancy, you have accountancy on the fly in this case. You make the payment, it is recorded on the blockchain, everybody can see it. It's also auditable. You can run a piece of software to the blockchain, and you can immediately see who has how much bitcoins and where they come from, etc. So does that mean that the world of audit and accountants will change? Yes, absolutely. I believe that the job of accountants and auditors will change. Doesn't mean that they will completely disappear, because there are still quite some accounting rules to be followed, etc. But there are some parts of the jobs that will change, that's for sure. And it's going to be probably the entry-level part. If you think about auditors, the entry-level part, the first years of an auditor today, that will be replaced by something else. Good. Bitcoin is not anonymous, just as we showed. You can trace back the transactions. So when Jens is sending his Bitcoin over to Matthias, there's actually a check, where does that come from? And we can see that it comes from me. So it's absolutely transparent. You can go online on blockchain.info, look into every block, look into every transactions, look into every Bitcoin account. So it's not anonymous at all. And that's quite funny, because people think it is sometimes. The whole story about the ransomware recently, I think that was a very stupid idea to ask payments in Bitcoins, because as soon as the guy will buy a pizza or whatever, we will know who's behind it. We will know who did the ransomware attack. So I don't think that money was really the purpose there, unless it was a mistake. Good. So in the old system, or in the current system, we have money, paper money, that we use to transfer things, and we base our lives on that. In the new system, we have cryptocurrencies. And everybody can create his own cryptocurrency. Bitcoin is one example of them, but there are many others. But what Bitcoin makes possible is it gives you back the freedom of currency. We have freedom of speech, we have freedom of movement, but today we don't really have a freedom of currency. We are obliged to pay our taxes with the euros, etc. So Bitcoin is allowing anyone to create a currency of its own. It's a matter of having enough people to follow you, but this is what Bitcoin makes possible. Just like internet made it possible for anyone to create an article online, Bitcoin, blockchain makes it possible for anyone to create his own currency. And there are many currencies out there that can do many different things. Dash, Monero, for example, the two on the left, are currencies that are more anonymous than Bitcoin. So if you want to do one somewhere, use these, but I didn't tell you that, of course. Instead of Bitcoin, you'll have much more anonymity, which I think is somehow a good thing as well for currency. A currency should not be too traceable. You have solar coin in the middle. What is solar coin? Solar coin is a coin that incentivizes the production of solar energy. If you, for example, create 1 megawatt of solar energy, you can claim 1 solar coin. And then with this solar coin, you can exchange it for a couple of cents. I think today is somewhere between 20 and 30 cents of euros that you can do. But this creates an incentive for you to produce solar energy. And you can eventually move them around from one place to the other, put some light in a place somewhere, paid with solar coins. I'm not going to go into detail into that. But basically, you can create all types of new coins to incentive new things or that have different characteristics. The one on the top there is a funny one. That's Dogecoin. It's a coin that just wanted to illustrate that everything is possible. They say, we're going to create a certain amount of coins. We don't know how much, and every so often. We don't know how often either. So we basically create something that is very random, which makes absolutely no sense from a monetary point of view, but still it ended up as a third largest cryptocurrency at one point of time. Now it's going down, of course. People realize it's a joke. But just to show that everything is possible with cryptocurrencies, everybody can create his own thing in which he believes. Now that might be scary, to think that money is something we base our lives on. We all study to get good jobs, to earn some money, but in the end, money is something that changed over time. This was a form of money. This, the gold coins, and sometimes there was more silver in there than there should have been, of iron. But we believe that one gold coin was equal to another gold coin. Then eventually we created paper money that was backed by gold. And today we have paper money, which we call fiat currency, which is nothing else than just paper. And it's backed by absolutely nothing, except the fact that we all use it and that we all trust that it serves something. But there's no underlying value, it is just paper. And I find this sometimes scary to know that, yeah, that's what we use daily and that's how our society functions. That's the main tool for our society to function. And all of these paper monies, these fiat currencies, they all have exchange rate against each other. This is the exchange rate of the euro against the dollar, and you can see that the euro can lose a bit of his value over time, maybe 10% or more or less, but these currencies are free-floating against each other, just the same way as cryptocurrencies are free-floating against each other, all based on offer and demand. This is the inflation rate in monetary supply of the different currencies. I'm not going to go into detail there. What I want to show you is this. 1923. This is someone in Germany who tries to buy a bread. And what you see on his little kind of truck there is all the notes, paper money that he needed to buy one bread. And you might say this is 1923. This is 2008 in Zimbabwe. I have a note of Zimbabwe 2008 with me, which says $100 trillion. So I'm quite rich in Zimbabwean dollars. Not sure what's that worth today. But just to show you how money can be subject to hyperinflation. And to really illustrate the case of Zimbabwe in 2008, when I was in Dublin, I met someone from there, and he left the country in 2005. And he told me the biggest note at that point of time was $500. And man, when you had $500 in Zimbabwe, you were rich. And when I showed him this note in 2008, he said, yes, it's completely stupid because you could be super rich in 2005 and have absolutely nothing in 2008. And that's because there was this paper money went out of control. There was an hyperinflation. Now you might think Zimbabwe is an exceptional case. We're not living in Zimbabwe. I think our central banks in Europe are doing a good job. But this is a list of countries that in the last 15 years had cases similar to Zimbabwe. So you can see that it's not just Zimbabwe. 25% of the planet has been subject to that. I mean, in 25% of the world, people lost everything just because the central banks didn't manage their money correctly. So that's the system in which we are in today. We see that the US, Europe, they're doing a quite good job, but who says that's going to stay that way? We don't know. With cryptocurrencies, I know a bit where I'm going. This is the monetary supply of Bitcoin. So this is kind of the inflation in the monetary supply for Bitcoin. And it's also one of the rules of the blockchain. It's written in there that every new block that is created, a certain number of new coins are minted. And I'm not going to go into detail on how they are made, but what matters is that I know exactly that every 10 minutes there's going to be 15 Bitcoins created. And for the next 4 years, 25, and then 12 and a half, and so on and so on. So the monetary supply is pre-programmed in code that is maintained by us all. By everybody who's using the blockchain maintains this. So I am quite sure that this is not going to change so rapidly. And I'm also quite sure that when I own one Bitcoin, I own 1/21 millionth of the economy. If I own €1 million, I have no clue what I own from the economy. And I'm betting that no one really knows, even the central banks don't know how much money is in circulation, or not exactly. So that's the power, I think, of cryptocurrencies, is that I can trust exactly what I own, and I can trust exactly how much is going to be issued in the future, because it's pre-programmed into code that you cannot change. Money currencies, so that's why I believe cryptocurrencies will have a bright future. Maybe not all of them, and maybe Bitcoin might not even the major cryptocurrency in a couple of years, but the system of transferring things from one person to another digitally certainly has a big future, because this creates a lot of more efficiency in the transfer of Bitcoins or the transfer of Euro system, but it also creates a new way to transact. So, oh yeah, that was for the people who do some trading. I'm sure you know that. To the moon. So yes, I believe they have a future. Absolutely. So I talked about cryptocurrency when transferring value, but it's basically you can transfer anything the same way you do with Bitcoins. Remember the checks? Let's say we don't speak about Bitcoins, but we speak about shares. Absolutely possible. And that's actually what we have Swift and Euroclear doing today. They keep track of who owns how many shares from a company, for example. And it can take 2 weeks when they need to know who owns how many shares at one point of time. It can take 2 weeks to find out who owned how much shares at one point of time. In the blockchain, it takes 10 minutes. You just run a software to it and you know exactly who owns what. So yes, this is a system. The blockchain system is a system that is much more efficient to transfer value and to keep track of these things. You can put diamonds in their votes. I'm not going to go into detail, but basically everything you can have, and especially when you can have a unique digital representation of your asset, you can transfer the ownership from one person to another via blockchain. The third thing, smart contracts. And I really want you to understand this. This is super important. This is maybe even more important than cryptocurrencies. This makes it possible, now that we have a cryptocurrencies, to create a new types of contracts. And let me illustrate that by a very simple example. Something you cannot do today. Let's say I'm sitting on the bus with Bob again, and it's the first time I meet him. We don't know each other very well, so we end up in a quite boring discussion. We speak about the weather. And might be a boring discussion, but we're quite convinced that we both think we're going to know what the weather's going to be tomorrow. He thinks it's going to be 25 degrees in Ghent. I don't believe it. I say it's probably going to be less. And we're willing to bet. We're willing to both put 50 euros on the table. Now, today, we won't do that, because first, I don't know that guy. 2, I might never see him again. And 3, if I see him again, I'm not sure he's going to pay me. And if he doesn't pay me, I'm not going to go to a court either, because it's only 50 euros. So we're never going to make a contract. We're never going to make this bet. But with a smart contract and a digital currency, we can do these things. So what's going to happen? We're going to write a contract between me and Bob. We're going to write the code of the contract. So this is really IT code like VBA, C++, whatever language you know. This is kind of the same thing. It's called Solidity. And this, oh yeah, by the way, Bitcoin cryptocurrency happens, in this case, on the Bitcoin network. Smart contracts happens on the Ethereum network. It's another type of blockchain which allows for smart contracts. But I'm basically going to write my code of our bet saying, okay, if tomorrow it is 25 degrees, then person A receives 100 euros. If not, person B receives 100 euros. And we're both going to put our money, or cryptocurrency money, in the contract. So we're both going to transfer the ownership of our money to the contract. And that's done by doing a simple transactions the way I do it now. We basically both write a check to the contract saying that the contract now owns 100 euros or 100 bitcoins, whatever it is. And we're going to sign this. We're going to sign the contract together. Now what's going to happen tomorrow? At 4 p.m., the contract, if we decide at 4 p.m., will execute himself and will say, okay, maybe I'm going to have a look on Google if that's how we programmed it, and we're going to see who wins the bet. And the contract will execute the payment to whoever wins the bet. So we have the automation of the transfer of value. We automate the payment. We also make sure that the contract will execute. You cannot remove it because it's in there, and you cannot change the code. So if in the end we say, okay, maybe we want to change things. No, that's not possible, unless you foresee it, of course. But you can create this kind of trustless contracts, which is possible. So what's really key, and that's why I say it's important, we have cryptocurrencies that we can have digital, which is something like a digital token you can transfer from one person to another, but you can also transfer that to a smart contract, which can then do with these cryptocurrencies what you decide it will do. So everything that's related to automation of payments based on conditions you can do. Examples. Your flight is delayed. I had the case of a Ryanair flight that was delayed for 4 hours. Tried to get some money back because I could get 250 euros back. Didn't try for a long time because the first gate was already your flight departed. Even if it's late, you're not supposed to get something back. That's not what the law says. But if I wanted to complain, I had to go to Dublin and to the court over there. Let's imagine I can claim my money back and I go further. There's someone I need to hand in some paperwork. I need to hand in something on the website. There's someone who's going to check those things. There's then someone who's going to say yes, no. There's someone who's going to make a payment. There's a lot of admin work or system work that is involved in there. And if I'm lucky, in 2 weeks I'll get the payment. But if we have a smart contract that continuously monitor when my flight is delayed, let's say at the moment of my booking, I'm saying, okay, if my flight is delayed of 30 minutes, I get 50 euros back. If it's delayed of 1 hour, I get 100 euros back, and I subscribe to that. As soon as the flight is supposed to depart, the smart contract starts running and checks how much my flight will be delayed. Nothing? Okay, then I don't earn anything. But if it's delayed of 15 minutes, for example, well, I get my 30 minutes, so that's my 50 euros. I get my 50 euros back, and that's done in 15 minutes. Because the flight departed information is publicly available. So it automates these payments that I can get. And I don't need to trust anyone. I don't need to trust the airline company. I don't need to trust an insurance company, etc. Okay. I don't know if the sound works, but I want to show you a little video of how we combine blockchain with IoT. So we know that a smart contract can have money, but basically objects that are connected to a smart contract will be able to have money as well. This is a startup that tries to solve the problem we have when we rent an Airbnb, where we basically always need to meet the person to hand over the keys. So I hope this works. There we go. It doesn't. Is the sound on? The sound is on. Okay. Never mind. I do have a backup slide. So I'm just going to explain it. I'm sorry, you won't have the bright people talking, you'll have me. Basically what happens is you have a lock that sits on your door, and the lock is connected to a smart contract on the blockchain. Now on the blockchain, the smart contract says all the conditions you have to fulfill to book. So for example, the apartment needs to be available. I'm going to make a payment to the smart contract, so I'm going to pay the booking system somehow for day 1 to day 3, for example. And smart contract sees that it's still available, no one else paid for these dates, so it books it for me. Then I come to the door, and what I need to do is I need to basically show that I'm the person who made the payment. So I need to make a signature that is the same as the one that made the payment. If that's the case, the door opens and I can walk in. Then basically this allows you to rent, share, or sell anything. You can imagine your dishwasher. If you have a shared apartment, someone pays a dishwasher, but every time someone wants to use it, he needs to pay €1 to the smart contract to make sure that the dishwasher goes open. Absolutely feasible. And then when I leave the apartment, I can get some money back, or the payment goes then to the money that was collected goes to the owner, etc. You can program whatever you want the lock to do. This is a slide I presented beginning 2016. I remember people thought I was a bit crazy at that time, but basically because everything can be a wallet, you could have renting cars. So these were self-driving trucks that were on the Belgian roads beginning 2016. And I thought, yeah, let's have self-renting cars in the future, where you can just pay a car, you make your payment from you directly to the car, because the car has a wallet, he has a cryptocurrency bank account. You pay the car opens because it receives a payment and it starts driving. And if you pay him 5 bitcoins, maybe you're going to drive 5 miles. If you pay him 10 bitcoins, you're going to drive 10 miles. I remember people at the end of the conference, they told that I was a bit crazy. But this happened, May 2017, so 1 year later. There was a company in Germany who managed to do that. So basically paying the car opens. They're still looking now on how to make it drive a certain amount of miles based on the amount you pay, but I think that's the next step. So these things are happening. Objects can have their own wallet. This is also an interesting one. This is your TV, your future TV, which is going to have a smart contract connected to the blockchain. And you're going to set the rules of your TV. You're going to say, I'm willing to have 2 minutes of advertisements for every hour I'm watching or I'm behind the TV. And by the way, I'm Jean-Luc. I'm 27 years old. I'm single, or as my mom would say, married to the blockchain. But that's valuable information. That's something someone wants to know, right? Because for an advertiser, maybe they're going to advertise me Tinder, or maybe even more importantly, they're probably going to pay more to advertise me something related to a blockchain job, knowing that 28% of the job offers today require blockchain skills, or that's something that is looked for by employees. So basically, my TV is going to look out on who's going to pay the most to get 2 minutes of my attention. So in this case, you can ask yourself, is my attention becoming a currency? Absolutely. Now, this is changing everything. If you're Telenet, you're scared of this, of course. But you can also, since your wallet now collects money for the advertisement you will see, it can also pay money to you if you watch a documentary, for example. So, new business models, new opportunities, objects receive payments, and this is what we call a machine-to-machine economy, where one machine can pay another machine if the different smart contracts are linked to each other and can interact with each other. This is another example. This is a smart plug, which is basically for your self-renting car that wants to recharge itself. It looks for plugs, and it needs some electricity. And maybe, depending on the amount of electricity he has left, he's willing to pay more or less of electricity, and then you have a plug. Let's imagine your friends come home at your barbecue, and they need to recharge your car. They can just plug it in, and if there's an agreement between the smart contracts of the plug that says, I want to have a minimum of so many euros for electricity that goes out, and the car is willing to pay that, the car just sends the money over to the plug receives the money, so this is all happening on the blockchain in the back, but as soon as the plug receives the money, he opens his kind of electricity gates and releases the electricity to the car. So if you ask me why we're still putting this charging station along our roads, I think this might be useless in a couple of years. This is also working on a small scale. It's not, if everybody starts using it, it doesn't work anymore. But this is possible. It's just a matter of time before we manage to make it work for everyone. Good, the future. Yes, because everything you saw until now is happening. There's nothing that is not happening in what I told you. It's all small scale, but it does happen in the labos. In the future, I think we're going to go a level further, and we like to think today about Uber as being a disruptor. But what if you could Uberize Uber? And because what Uber is actually doing, they're just matching someone who needs a taxi driver with someone who's looking for someone for a ride, basically. And that's an algorithm that does the matching. And in the middle, you have Uber as a middleman that takes a fee. But basically, this is all code. You can put all of this code in this blockchain, maintain it collectively, and there will be no fee taken the way Uber does it now. You still need to update these things, so there are some limitations, but ultimately, this is absolutely possible a couple of years down the road. Not going to go through all of them, just want to highlight identity as well. Identity, the way we know it today, is something very recent. Passports to travel abroad were standardized only in 1980, so that's 30 years ago, it's not so long. And before World War I, we didn't even have ID cards. So we take it for granted that identity is our little ID card we have, but it wasn't that way. And if you go to other countries outside Europe, that's still not the way identity is managed. So the whole essence of identity is also a very recent phenomenon. And I think blockchain opens there again the new door for new ways of having identity. I'm not going to go into detail. You can read about it further. There are a couple of pages in my book on that. But it gives kind of ownership back to the people on what they want to share with their information or not about themselves. Decentralized autonomous organizations. What is a decentralized autonomous organization? It's basically a lot of smart contracts working together, and you put the governance rules of an organization in there as well. I'm going to give you one example, which is a decentralized venture capital fund. So that's a company that collects money to invest into other companies. And the smart contracts that was managing this DAO was running for 30 days, receiving all the cryptocurrencies money, so all Ethereum cryptocurrencies, so Ether, into it, and then after the 30, and in exchange for the cryptocurrencies you received, you get vote tokens. Now, and with these vote tokens, you can then at the end of the 30 days decide when a project comes in and say, for example, the locks or the TV, I want to make a project, but I need someone to finance my locks. Are you willing to give me some of that money? So 30 days, the period runs, $115 million collected, biggest crowdfunding ever at that point of time. And then people start presenting projects, and people can vote yes or no. I want to invest a part of this 150 million into that project, or I don't want to do so. Went all perfectly until one day someone was smarter than everybody else and found one line of code that he could manipulate from the outside, and he ran away with $60 million just in one night. And it was impossible to change this because the DAO was in the blockchain. The rules were in the blockchain. And if you want to change the rules, you need everybody to agree on that. So it was impossible to change these rules so rapidly. So one single mistake in the blockchain stays in there forever and can have consequences. So very important to realize if you code stuff, what you code. Now this is a case that failed, but there are DAOs working, there are cryptocurrencies that work in a decentralized governance, with a decentralized governance that are working perfectly well. But just to show you that the more complex you go into the code, the more difficult it is to be sure that there's never going to be something you do not expect. If your code is very simple, like making a bet on the weather, it's quite easy to review it and to make sure things will go well. But this is something I believe we're going to see more and more in the next coming years. New forms of companies that start working together, because a company is nothing more than a set of smart contracts, or a set of contracts between individuals. We can put that on a blockchain to a certain extent. Conclusions. So what can we do with it? First, we can put our records in here. That's the book. We can put information in there, messages on who says what. We have freedom of currency. Everybody can create his own currency. We also have increased transparency on how currencies float from one person to another, are transferred, but also on smart contracts. What are the stages that are executed in the smart contract? What is the state of the smart contract today? What are the rules to follow? Where are we going to look what the weather is tomorrow on the smart contract? Trustless contracts in the sense that you don't need to trust someone else, you just write a contract and it's going to happen. And then finally, new forms of organizations. Challenges to overcome. First, scalability, and that's a really big one. Everything I say today is true and could be the future if we solve scalability. Scalability basically means that today this all works, but if everybody starts using it, it's going to fail. So that's something that is really important. If the scalability issues are solved, we're going to have a whole new world. If we don't manage to solve the scalability issues, we're going to see some niche applications, but it's not going to have the full potential as we expected today. So really important. But I'm optimistic, because when I see the research that is being done, I'm optimistic that in a couple of years we will get to something that is more broadly available and that can be used by more and more people. I like to compare it to the internet 20 years ago or 30 years ago, where you had maybe an image that took 30 minutes to load, and today we're streaming HD movies through Netflix. The second one is interface integration. Even if you have a blockchain system that works, there are still a lot of companies that work with legacy systems, mainframes, old databases, and those kind of things. You'll always have to make the bridge. So you will have to take your legacy with you, and you will have to integrate these things between each other. Legal tender. Today, cryptocurrencies are not recognized by governance or by central banks. I think maybe central banks will not recognize cryptocurrencies, I don't know that, but I'm quite sure that central banks will create their own cryptocurrency. just because that's something they're looking at. They're looking actively into that, and I think there's almost 75% of the central banks today in the world that are doing so. So I expect in the next 5 years that we will have something like a cryptographic form of the euro, which we will be able to put into smart contracts, and which will be much easier for businesses to do their reporting, accountancy, and taxation, and so on, because it's a currency that is legal tender. Code is low. Everything you write in there is low, so you cannot change the code, so be sure you code it well. That's really important. 5, this is my grandmother. She's amazing. I love her very much. But she's not a fan of technology. And I might be a geek, and you might all be bright people who maybe are a bit geek as well, or at least accustomed to digital and technology. She's not. And we need to make these things simple in a way that she understands this. Because this is about bringing a technology to the people, but if it's not easy, if it's not user-friendly, no one will use it. So these are a couple of challenges to overcome, but do not be fooled. Yes, Bitcoin redefines money. It opens our minds on what money really is today, and it's a new way of seeing money. Smart contracts, they do redefine contractual agreement, especially for everything that is quantitative. Qualitative stuff is still a bit difficult, but you can manage. You can foresee that your smart contracts has human inputs there. And yes, decentralized autonomous organization might redefine organizations in the future. So blockchain will change almost everything if we solve some of the challenges we saw. And I believe that just like the internet changed a lot of things in a lot of industries, there are today a lot of players in all of these industries that are ready to take over what is existing today. Yeah, one more thing. I promised my flatmates to do this. It's not every day that I have an audience of 800 people, so I want to make sure that I have a little bit of a souvenir for me, and that my flatmate is happy with the bet that he won. So I'm going to take a selfie, so I hope you all look quite good on this one. You ready? There we go. So going to post that on Facebook and Twitter. Feel free to find it over there. You can follow me there, and please, Facebook, it's not my personal account, it's a Facebook page that is... Guys, can I have you back? No, it's not done yet. We're not done yet. You can follow stuff on blockchain, Bitcoin, if you want to stay interested, connect over there. I'm also looking for an intern to promote the book and to do a kind of 360-degree management internship. There's a lot of logistics involved, finance, marketing, sales reporting, digital stuff. So if you're interested in an internship, I'm looking for someone now or in January. Finally, if you're interested in the book, you can have it for 15 euros downstairs. It's normal, please. Normal price is 25 euros, but you get it for one-time offer for Capitant student. Last but not least, I want to thank someone. So with the book, there are many There are many people that helped me with the book, some of the most renowned people in the blockchain space. But there are also other people who helped me, and today we have Kim here, that was one of the people who helped me with writing the book and making sure that people become aware of that. So I'd like to thank you all very much for your attention, and I'd like to thank Kim as well for his support. So thank you all.
Thanks. Yeah, it's nice. Oei.
Het was niet de beste speech om eerlijk te zijn, maar...
Wauw. Ja, Thomas, we gaan hiermee aan. Hello guys, can I please ask you to sit down a little bit? We have one last very interesting speaker. Yeah, it's not all about blockchain today. So please sit down, and I will introduce you to
Chaos! Niet naar je pot toezetten. Mensen die willen blijven zitten, blijven sowieso zitten, dus kijk.
Ah, ik weet het, ja. Dan ga je ook een betere lezing hebben.
Ja, super goed gedaan.
Maar dat zijn ze aan het doen, hè. Ja, oké. Mensen, aan iedereen graag gaan zitten alsjeblieft. Dan stel ik jullie graag onze laatste spreker voor. Hij is een associate researcher at Arabesque en hij is alumnus van ons eigen Capitant, maar dan in Antwerpen. Dames en heren, The Future of Investment by Stéphan Vuylsteke.
Is dat zo? Ik denk het wel. Zo. All right. Good evening, everyone. Can everyone hear me as well in the back, or is it too loud or too soft? All good. Perfect. I'll try not to make it too long. I know it's late and it's quite warm because of the huge crowd. So I'll just walk you through it. So as Jens kind of introduced, my name is Stéphan. I'm working at Arabesque. I basically graduated 2 years ago at the University of Antwerp as a business engineer. And then I went straight to Frankfurt and joined there in the ESG team. And now I just moved to London last month ago, which is now my hometown. So Arabesque is an asset management firm. And our mission is to make sustainable investing financially attractive and available to everyone. And we do that by integrating ESG, and ESG, you can hear a lot of this presentation, stands for environmental, social, and governance data. So we integrate that into quantitative investment strategies, and this way we try to deliver financial outperformance to our investors, basically. The story of Arabesque starts in 2010 at Barclays Bank, where they just sold off their asset management industry to BlackRock, and they had a 5-year non-compete clause. But after a while, they started thinking, okay, so in 2013 we can start again. So how should we start with this new asset management business? And so they basically appointed Omar Selim. He was then the head of global markets in the entire European time zone, to think about how to launch this new asset management branch. And he took the time and he spoke with a lot of professors from leading institutions like Stanford, Cambridge, Maastricht, Fraunhofer, and so forth. And they decided that this new business needed to be built on 2 pillars. The first pillar is they need to integrate values and sustainability into investment decisions. And the second was, I mean, technology is everywhere, so they understood that this new business needed to be based on quant, based on data. In 2013, there was the opportunity for basically Omar and his team at Barclays to buy out the whole company and independently start Arabesque, which it is now. So it's a fully owned company by the partners and employees. And we're based in London, Frankfurt, Singapore, and also just some small satellites here and there. The main thing I want to talk about today is basically why it makes sense to integrate sustainability into your investment decisions and what the proper ways to do so. We've noticed over the past decades that a lot of industries have had radical changes. If you look at, for example, Tesla changing the auto industry, you look at Apple changing the whole smartphone and basically consumer electronics industry over the past decade. You have Amazon now just recently changing the whole fast-moving consumer goods industry. They just bought Whole Foods, and there's rumors of them going to buy Carrefour as well. Plenty of things going on in basically every industry, but asset management so far has been relatively left untouched. It's still a quite traditional industry. It's based on a lot of trust. It's based on relationships with fund managers who have a lot of seniority and who are well versed in their respective industries. But we expect that all of this is about to change quite radically, actually. So we're looking forward to asset management version 2.0. And this new evolution is basically driven by 3 inputs. And those are the 3 I'm going to talk about today. Sustainability, technology, and values. And I want to focus mostly on the first 2, sustainability and technology. Sustainability, first of all, it's a concept that has been defined in many different ways. And the way that you define a term also defines how you perceive it and how it's going to work in reality. So first of all, to us, sustainability, a sustainable company is a company that not only operates well in its current environment, but is also well positioned to make profits in the future environment, in 5 years, in 10 years, in 20 years, and so forth. So basically, a sustainable company has management that knows how to deal with short-term risks, but also knows how to innovate to capture long-term opportunities. And using sustainability data allows an investor to get a better sense of what the company is actually about and what their vision is on the long term and how they plan on being profitable in the future as well. Then the second part is the technology part. Again, technology is everywhere nowadays. We just had talks about blockchain, there's machine learning, there's big data, whatever, you name it. And they're not just buzzwords. I mean, every industry is changing. And asset management, again, hasn't changed that much so far, but that's about to change as well. And two important concepts in the technology part is human biases and also just big data, being able to go through a lot more data than you would if you were just a person. The third part, when you're investing your money, of course, a very important question to ask is, well, if I invest these 10 euros, what am I going to get back? And which risk am I going to take when doing so? But more and more, and I guess mostly through the recent evolution in information technology, people also wonder, well, how was this return generated? You know, what was driving it and what was harmed or in which industries or whatever? And that is something, a question that we can ask a lot better than we could, for example, 10 or 20 years ago. So let's dive right into it. First part, sustainability. To understand why sustainability makes sense for an investor, we have to take one small step back. And we have to look at the value creation process of a company. Very quickly summarized, the way that a business creates value is in 3 steps. In the first step, it's going to use inputs. It's going to use natural capital. It's going to use human capital and financial capital. And it's going to create new resources, basically physical capital, which would be like production goods, social capital, which is basically the relation between a company and its society. This relationship allows the company to keep on producing its goods. It's basically a license to operate. And then also intellectual capital. It's going to train its employees, it's going to get new intellectual property and so forth. And then with these newly created resources, a company can start producing goods and services, for which in return is going to get financial compensation, of course. Now, that's not the only thing that the company produces. There's also a thing called externalities. I'm sure plenty of you have heard them before. An externality is basically an effect that someone has on their environment that they don't fully bear the cost or the benefit from. And you have positive and negative externalities. For example, a positive externality is when a company invests in the training of their employees. Well, obviously the company is going to benefit because their employees get smarter and they get more productive and they can add more value to the company. But at the same time, the extra skills that these employees get, they can also transfer to the rest of society. If they change company, for example, these skills are not lost. So the company invests a certain amount, but as a society, we get a lot more back than what was initially invested. Negative externalities, on the other hand, are also quite common. If you look, for example, at a company that is producing some chemicals, this company might be ditching its wastewater in a small river somewhere and not paying for the pollution because there's just no way to track these costs. So the company is not directly incurring costs for the externality, but society as a whole, people get sick. I mean, it has to be cleaned at some point, animals die, and so forth. So someone is at some point going to pay for the cost. Now, these externalities don't directly impact the company's finances, but they do affect their physical capital and mostly their social capital and intellectual capital. Because when a company is producing too many negative externalities, it's going to lose its license to operate. When the company, like I mentioned, the company is producing chemicals and it's ditching all its wastewater into the local pond, at some point things are going to change. Some government is going to step in and say, hey, listen, you can't do this anymore, or you're going to pay huge fines and clean everything up. And then the company is going to suffer financially. And then again, that's going to affect you as an investor as well. And then in addition to these externalities, there's just, put simply, the reputation effect. If as a company you are involved in some big scandal, for example, if tomorrow it comes out that the company is involved in child labor, that's going to have very drastic impacts on a lot of things. It's going to get fined by the government probably. it's going to lose sales because customers, they don't want to be associated with a company that is involved in child labor. And then plenty more things. You get lawsuits, their suppliers might not want to deal with them anymore, and so forth. So sustainability really impacts the way that a company can operate and can make money. Let's give this one. As an investor, it's crucial if you want to make an investment to have sufficient information on a certain company. You want to know, for example, what are its revenues, what are its price-to-earnings ratio, its cash flows, and so forth. And I mean, I'm talking about sustainability a lot today, but that doesn't mean that I don't think financials are important. They're crucial. It's very important. Do your due diligence, look at the company and see what its balance sheets are, how is it performing in the past, and so forth. But the issue is, this data is more of a current snapshot. It looks like, how is the company doing at this point of time, and perhaps in the past as well, but it's not that much forward-looking. And as an investor, you care about your future returns, not about what returned in the past. And that's where ESG data comes into play, because it provides more of a view on, again, how the management is looking at its position to operate in a future environment, making money for you in the future. So ESG, or sustainability data, is just an additional data set in addition to what you already have from your finances and so forth. Now what I'm saying here, I mean, I could just be talking, but actually there's quite a bit of academic evidence that backs all that up. This is just one example that we did. We, in collaboration with Oxford University, we wrote a meta-study that analyzed over 200 papers that looked at the relation between corporate financial performance and ESG. And these are just the three findings that we have. For example, 90% of studies show that companies that perform well on sustainability topics have a lower cost of capital. Which makes sense, because if, as a company, you publish on your performance, on your sustainability efforts, and you're doing well, then you take some risk away from people that are looking into lending you money, because they know what you're doing, they know how you're going to keep on doing it, and you provide the data to them in a nice and readable way. So if you take risk away, they're going to be willing to give you money at a lower rate, lowering your cost of capital. Same thing for operational performance. 88% of studies show that more sustainable firms get better operational performance, and 80% of studies show that they also get better stock price performance than their non-sustainable counterparts. Deutsche Bank had a similar study. They looked at 2,000 studies. Again, 90% of studies show that there's a non-negative, so either positive or neutral, relation between sustainability and financial performance. There's a bunch more. I'll just skip through these. But one thing I want to highlight is this slide on materiality. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the term materiality, but it basically means that in the field of sustainability, you have a whole lot of different topics. You could look at, for example, a company's energy mix. You could look at its board diversity. You could look at how well it's treating its employees. You could look at customer retention. Plenty of topics. And for some companies, or for some sectors, for some countries, different topics are going to be important or not important. And material topics are those topics that are financially relevant to a certain company. And the study done by some professors at the Harvard Business School analyzes how companies with high performance on material issues and on immaterial issues do financially. And striking is, this green box of plus 6% shows that companies that perform well on material topics, but not so much on immaterial topics, outperform their peers by roughly 6% per annum. And then as they start performing less on material and immaterial issues, the performance goes down to minus 2.9% for companies that perform poorly on both material and immaterial issues. But what strikes me mostly here is that you can see that companies that perform well on material issues, but poorly on immaterial issues, do better than companies that perform well on all topics. Which might seem a bit contradictory at first, but then again, if you're doing well on topics that don't really matter, you're just wasting your efforts and you're wasting your money and your time, and it's not going to bring value to anyone. And just to give a bit of an example on this materiality, for example, let's take a mining company. A mining company is very much operating in its natural environment. It's getting resources from its environment, and it's probably dumping some waste as well. So environmental ESG topics are going to be much more important for this company to look at than its social and its governance topics. They're still important, just not as important. For a bank, on the other hand, they might be implementing some programs on how to cut their electricity usage or to recycle paper or whatever. And that's fine, that's a good thing to do. but that's not the impact that the bank is having on its environment. Having sound governance, making sure that the board is diverse, that there are good checks in place to make sure that people's assets are being treated well, has a much bigger impact on society as a whole. So it's important at any time when you look at a company, make sure you're looking at those topics that are actually relevant to the company and don't waste your time on the ones that aren't. Materiality, in short. So now we've seen that sustainability is quite capable of adding performance, both to the company and to you as an investor. So anyone who is a bit familiar with the stock market, as soon as something is obviously adding value to you as an investor, everyone is going to start doing it, and then you can't make money because everyone's already doing it. So why do we still do ESG? Why do we think that ESG is still adding alpha to your investment? The reason is quite simple. Financial data is very rich. There's plenty of financial data, and it's very well structured. If you want to look at the company's balance sheet, you know where to get it, you know how to read it, and you know what it means. It's very straightforward. It's also audited. The company can't just write whatever it wants. There's some degree of leeway, of course, but still, it's very much regulated. But for ESG data, that's not at all the case. It's very difficult to do ESG properly because a company doesn't have to publish its data. It can choose how it publishes it. It's not always audited. So you can't just compare the ESG performance of two companies simply by looking at, for example, their ESG reports. So that means because it's so hard to look at ESG, there's a lot more alpha to be found because just not everyone can do it. And I have some more slides on trends, why ESG is important now, but let's just go over that now and move straight to the next part. So then we're up to the technology part. The second pillar of Arabesk. Basically, there's two reasons why we incorporate technology or a quantitative approach in everything that we do. The first part is that you have human biases. Human biases are everywhere. I mean, as human beings, we're very smart and very capable of solving problems, and we can do a lot of things that machines cannot do. At the same time, in daily life, we can't think about every situation and go for the most optimal situation because it would just take too much time to analyze all possible scenarios, look at their benefits, and then pick the one that suits you well. So that's why we develop heuristics. And heuristics enable you to, using a very limited amount of energy and inputs, to determine the most optimal situation given the circumstances. The problem is these heuristics, over time they accumulate as you get more used to certain situations and you get influences from your environment, from education, from whatever, and you start to deviate quite far from what a rational investor would do. And over time these deviations usually end up costing you more money than they actually gain you. And a very important, very interesting book, or an author in this field is Daniel Kahneman. He won the Nobel Prize. Largely for his work on prospect theory back with Amos Tversky in 75. If you haven't read the book, Thinking Fast and Slow, I would definitely recommend on doing so. And in that book, he describes a whole lot of these biases. I can't go into all of them now, there's just too many, but one of them, for example, is that people tend to treat values, gains and losses entirely differently. If you had the chance of winning €5 or losing €5, you would be a lot more unhappy about losing €5 than you would about winning €5. And that's going to impact the way that you behave on the stock market. Similarly, if things have been going well for a long time, people tend to get overconfident. They think that their well-being is due to their own skills and due to their own, they're just good at what they do. And they usually won't think it might have just been a good streak of luck. And all of these biases make that people are going to invest or make stupid investment decisions that are going to cost them money over time. So that's why we decided to eliminate the human bias from the investment process entirely. So everything we do is rules-based. Because quant, I think some people might have a bit of not a wrong, but perhaps a not entirely correct connotation of quant being high-frequency trading. So the very short-term arbitrage of the market, we just look at nanoseconds and try to beat the system. That is not the way that we do quant. When we say quant, we mean you build a system, you design the rules, you make sure that it's systematic, it's consistent, and then you're going to feed it all the data it needs. And in the end, you're going to get a result that is transparent, consistent, and not affected by any of the biases I mentioned before. A second advantage of technology is that back in the days, people would usually just look at companies' balance sheets and perhaps call some brokers, do some newspaper reading, and using those inputs, they would make their decision on buying or selling certain companies. Nowadays, you just can't do that anymore. There's too much data to look at. You get the financial data, but then you also have the sustainability data. And if you want to do it properly, you have to look at so many data points that you would be able to cover perhaps 1, 2, or 3 companies, but definitely not more than that. There's also news data, just all the news articles prepared, you can get social media and so forth. Having the system in place that can easily crunch through all these numbers helps you to look at a much broader universe of companies, and that helps again with diversification and just being able to properly invest into a wide range of stocks. IBM, for example, did some research and they showed that 90% of the world's current data has been generated in the past 2 years. And this law has been holding it for quite some time, so it's not just the fact of this year, it actually has been for, I think, the past 30 years. In addition to big data, there's also the importance of artificial intelligence. I won't go into too much detail on this one because it's been covered already before, but basically, pattern recognition is something that we as humans are not that strong at because we just can't look at too much data. So using machine learning and neural networks allows us to recognize patterns both from financial data but also from a sustainability point of view. I will go into more detail on that later on when I talk about S-ray. So what's next? I mean, we get this big evolution in technology that could potentially replace us as managers. Do we think that's going to happen? Difficult to say, but probably not. And an easy way to compare this is using the analogy of an airplane. Not that long ago, if you're going to take the plane to Bodrum, go to your favorite all-in hotel, the pilot would pilot the plane on his own, basically. He would do all the controls. He would make sure that the plane takes off safely, flies safely, lands safely, and that's that. Nowadays, if you step into the new Airbus, the pilot is still there. He's providing the inputs, but the plane basically flies itself. And that's good because it allows for a much safer flight and a much smoother flight because the plane is able to ingest so much more data than the pilot. And that just results in a better flight for you as a passenger. Now that said, the pilot is still in the plane and he won't go away for any time soon because whenever something goes wrong, the pilot still needs to be there to take control. And the pilot can also just improve things. And that's basically our job as well. Every decision that we make at our desk, again, is based on models and on data. But we are continuously on improving the model based on results that we get from our current systems. So I don't think that technology is going to replace asset managers, but I think that asset managers who don't use technology will be replaced by those who do, because it just allows for much better decision making. Next topic, values. I'll touch on this just very briefly. But basically, as an investor, everyone's going to have their own beliefs and their own convictions and their own values that they want to adhere to. Like some people might not feel comfortable investing their money into, for example, nuclear energy or weapons or alcohol or you name it. And we think that given the current state of information technology, you should have the ability to do so. It shouldn't be a financial consideration because it's in general not going to add any financial performance, but still it should be possible to do so. And one framework that we use at our desk is the United Nations Global Compact. It's basically an initiative, the largest of its kind, that tries to entice companies to do business in an ethical way. So they have 10 principles that you can summarize in 4 categories: environment, human rights, labor rights, and anti-corruption. They're very basic principles. For example, they forbid companies to be engaged in child labor, in human trafficking. They ask companies to take care of their environment and so forth. So it's very much an ethical thing, a baseline that you should at least adhere to. And for this United Nations Global Compact, we have developed a new score. But again, I will come to that in just a second. It's quite warm. So, Arbesk S-Ray. Arbesk started out purely as an asset management firm. You know, we have equity funds, and that's what we do. But we spend a lot of time building our sustainability process, which is the step where we, for each company, we look at all the data we get, and we calculate a score that determines how sustainable they are on different subtopics. But as I talked about earlier, it's very difficult for an investor to do this kind of sustainability screening because there's so much data involved, and it's very difficult to make sense of all the data. So we get quite a few requests from people asking, well, can we just have the sustainability data they have been producing so far? And that's why, I think about half a year ago, we decided to release our sustainability process under the product called Arbesk S-Ray. And S-Ray is reference to the X-ray. X-ray was a huge breakthrough in medicine because it allowed doctors to look beyond the skin. And in the same way, S-Ray, with S standing for sustainability, of course, allows us to get a better sense of the true corporate DNA of a company. It allows you to see what management is doing and what their visions are and where they want to go with the company. S-Ray consists of 3 subscores. The first one is the GC score, which refers to the United Nations Global Compact I just mentioned earlier. And it's very much an ethical score. It doesn't look too much at financial implications. It just allows people to quickly see whether the company is compliant with minimum ethical values and then react on that. The second score that we have is the ESG score. And the ESG score is where materiality comes into play. So basically for the ESG score, what we did is we analyzed all the different sectors. And for these sectors, identified those topics that are financially material, that are important for a company's financial performance, and then built our ESG score on those material topics. So using an ESG score allows the investor to actually get better financial performance while investing in sustainable companies. And then the third part of ESG is a preferences filter, which then comes back to the values part, where you can just quickly see okay, is this company involved in nuclear? Is it involved in GMOs? Is it involved in stem cell or whatever kind of topic you're interested in? Allowing you to customize your investment into something that you feel comfortable with. And the fun thing is S-Ray is a paid tool, so people can pay for it and they get proper access to all the underlying data and they get real-time updates and all the historical scores. But everyone can access the free version and get coverage on all of our companies. If you go to arbesk.com, click on S-Ray, you can see an interface like this. You can just scroll through it, click on certain companies, see what their ESG score is, what their GC score is, what their business involvement is. And that allows you just, very quickly get a sense of how the companies that you interact with in your daily life are actually performing from a sustainability point of view. I had a small video, but I'm afraid I won't be able to show it, but it's on the website as well, so if you want to have a look, please feel free. Just quickly to summarize the topics that I want to highlight with this presentation is sustainability makes sense for an investor if you do it right. Being sustainable means that you're ready to operate in a future environment and making profits for all your stakeholders, including your investors. But doing so is very difficult. There's so much data to analyze and so many things to consider that if you do not use technology to help you with this, you're not going to get that far. That was it. Thank you very much for your attention. And if you have any questions, I'll be there.
Bedankt allemaal om zo talrijk aanwezig te zijn, zowel hierboven in Get als beneden in de foyer. Er zijn mensen momenteel een livestream aan het kijken. Bedankt Stéphan, die komt helemaal van Frankfurt en morgen vertrekt hij weer naar Londen. Dus graag nog eens een applaus voor alle 3 de sprekers alstublieft. Kunnen jullie beneden nog inschrijven voor lid te worden dit jaar bij Capitant. En jullie kunnen ook nog een drankje en een hapje eten. Dank jullie wel.
Alles op. Jongen, echt. Er is niemand gefixt en overpoort. Ja, maar ja, oké. We kunnen stappen. Ja, we hebben een stap. Ja.
Kan ik die PowerPoints ergens krijgen?
Dat gaan we eerst aan de sprekers moeten navragen. Als dat zo is, ja, de sprekers. Die hebben dat niet meer bij.
Als het vrijkomt.
Ja, je moet aan hem vragen. Ik zit in mijn stress. Hallo, sorry. Meer stress dan alles goed? Ja. Bij mij tegen kant toch niet. Ja? Kom maar, hij dat lukt. Maar het scheelt het blijven.
Spart het op, maar je belt. En dan krijg je een als het vrijkomt, wordt het kunnen halen.
Wel, dan moet je vragen naar in de chat op Facebook en dat je dan naar de slides.
Dus onze pagina op Facebook volgen. Ja, dus ik zou daar vragen zijn slides beschikbaar. Dan gaan we sturen, vragen aan iemand spreken te krijgen op die manier. Goed? Ja. Ja, wat we nu allemaal gaan uitsteken, dat weet ik niet, maar de receptie aannemen.
De drankjes op, dat is al eens.
Dat is zo'n